In a forgotten African village, a 7-year-old girl died, not from war, not from famine, but because no ambulance could reach her. The road to her home had vanished beneath the rain. In Burkina Faso, that's not rare, it's routine. 60% of rural roads vanish every rainy season, cutting off children from schools, farmers from markets, and mothers from care. But in 2024, one man refused to accept that. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 35 years old, chose not to borrow millions or beg for aid. He reached down, picked up a handful of dirt, and said, "This is what we have. This is what we'll use. No loans, no machines, just dirt." And yet from that dirt, he began building something bigger than roads. He began rebuilding trust, dignity, and belief in a future made by African hands. The story you're about to hear is inspired by real places, real struggles, and real hope. While some characters and events are dramatized, the emotions, the injustice, the courage, the transformation are deeply real. So we ask you, can one man with no money and no allies truly stand up to a system that's crushed generations? Or was this road just the beginning? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The first raindrop landed with the sound of a distant drum, soft against the corrugated tin roof of the Sidibé family's hut on the edge of Koudougou. In seconds, the drum became a roar, a wall of water slamming sideways, turning the packed earth courtyard into a soupy red mire. Inside, a kerosene lamp shivered. Its flame painted long, trembling shadows over the mud-plastered walls and onto the face of 7-year-old Aissata, whose skin glistened with fever. Her mother, Mariama, knelt beside the reed mat, pressing a damp cloth to the girl's forehead. Every few breaths, Aissata's small chest fluttered, as though the air itself were too heavy to lift. Outside, thunder rattled the shutters. Inside, Mariama's whispered prayers vibrated no less violently. "Ya Allah, hold her! Hold her!" A sharp cough rattled the child. She whimpered, eyes unfocused, whispering for water. The only bucket stood empty, filled moments earlier, now spilled by the tremor in Mariama's hands. She bit her lip until she tasted iron, then called to her husband. Bakari Sidibé burst through the door, drenched, carrying a flickering battery torch. "The creek is already knee-high," he panted. "But I flagged the moto taxi. He says the bridge is gone. We must call the clinic." His voice cracked on the last word. Everyone in Koudougou knew the clinic's lone ambulance required an intact road the way lungs required oxygen. Bakari dialed anyway on their battered Nokia, their only expensive possession. Static. Then a voice, "We cannot reach you. Road is impossible. Keep her warm." Click. Impossible. The word echoed louder than the thunder. Bakari's eyes darted to a cardboard box tucked behind a clay jar. His father's rusting Husqvarna chainsaw, the tool that once fed the family. Could he fell a tree, improvise a new footbridge? But which tree? Which bank? Which hour? Lightning cracked so bright it carved ghost silhouettes of baobabs through the window slats. One misstep, and the flood would swallow them too. Mariama's composure splintered. "Do something," she hissed, though the plea was to heaven as much as to her husband. She hated herself for speaking. She hated the rain for answering with more rain. Bakari tied a faded yellow slicker over his shoulders, lifted Aissata in a blanket cocoon. The child's eyes fluttered at the sudden motion, pupils wide and glassy. Mariama slung a sack over her shoulder, salt, sugar, a Quran page folded small, then followed her husband into the storm. The path that by daylight felt familiar now looked alien, eaten into jagged gullies. Red clay slid like wet soap under Bakari's sandals. Every 2 steps he slipped, clutched a thorny branch, regained balance. Lightning revealed a brown river where the track had been. The Sidibés were islanded. Across the torrent, a single headlamp bobbed. Someone else stranded, honking a motorbike horn in feudal Morse. The sound underlined their isolation. There would be no Samaritan tonight. The rain thickened, turning the torch beam into a useless white smear. Still, Bakari trudged, calf deep, hip deep, water lapping at the blanket that swaddled his daughter. Her breathing grew ragged, a bellows with torn leather. "Papa," she rasped. The single word felt heavier than the entire river. Mariama, waiting behind, heard it and began to sing. An old lullaby about yellow birds and cocoa trees, her voice cracking like the branches floating past. She hoped the song might stitch reality back together, but each verse unraveled into sobs. Bakari reached what remained of the wood plank bridge, now two crooked rails protruding from frothing water. Impossible. That stubborn word again. He knelt on the riverbank, rain pounding his bowed head. Behind him, Mariama dropped to her knees too, clinging to the edge of his slicker. Aisata's breaths became small gasps, countable, finite. Then, in a moment quieter than any thunder, they stopped. She stilled, eyelids half closed as if mid-dream. Mariama's scream tore into the night, cutting through wind and rain, slicing open the sky itself. Bakari pressed his daughter's hand to his cheek, warm for one more heartbeat, then cooling. He let out a howl that sounded like metal shearing. The river answered by ripping another plank from the bridge and carrying it away. For a stretch of seconds, or was it minutes, the world contained only three figures kneeling in mud, illuminated by the indifferent flash of lightning. Somewhere upriver, a tam-tapped drum of flood debris cracked, but its rhythm felt impossibly distant. When Mariama could speak, it was a whisper. She was almost 8. A simple sentence, but it landed with the weight of a tombstone. Bakari rose unsteadily, blanket bundled in arms, and began the slow walk back through water that seemed suddenly heavier, as if morning had its own gravity. Morning in Ouagadougou usually arrives with a syrupy warmth and the clang of motorbikes, but inside the windowless situation room of Burkina Faso's Ministry of Infrastructure, the air felt more like a pressure cooker set to whistle. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on rows of battered filing cabinets and a single oblong conference table scarred by years of elbows and impatience. At its center stood Adama Traoré, 39, civil service gray suit rumpled from a night spent on a cot. His fingers trembled slightly as he unrolled a sheet of craft paper the size of a door. The map was a crude composite, satellite printouts taped together, administrative borders inked by hand. Yet one detail leapt out even to the most casual onlooker. Swaths of angry crimson streaking across nearly every province. From the dusty Sahel in the north to the lush Como Basin in the south, the arteries that should have connected markets, clinics, and schools were instead X'd out, vein after vein painted dead. Where secondary tracks overlapped, the red bled so thick it looked almost black. Adama pressed both palms to the paper to hold it flat, then sighed, a sound half exasperation, half apology, and addressed the half-circle of directors flanking him. "Gentlemen, ladies, this is last night's telemetry from the field units. With the storm front still moving east, the situation is worse than last year." He tapped a district outside Koudougou, where the ink all but erased the underlying road lines. Local monitors report that 60% of the rural network is already impassable. By tonight, that figure may rise. Someone at the back muttered, "The budget figures won't rise," and a few nervous chuckles skittered through the room, the bureaucratic equivalent of whistling past a graveyard. Adama ignored them. He uncapped a blue marker, one lone splash of optimism in a sea of red, and attempted to circle viable detours. The cap snapped shut with a plastic click that echoed louder than the remark. From the doorway slid Madame Kouyaté, the minister's senior policy advisor, her emerald boo-boo trailing behind like a righteous banner. She eyed the map, the directors, then Adama. "Status on the Koudougou corridor?" she asked, voice level but edged with caffeine and sleeplessness. "Gone," Adama replied. "Floodwaters took the plank bridge at 2 a.m. A faint image flashed in his mind. Helicopter footage of the same bridge last dry season, kids chasing goats over it, laughing. He swallowed. "Villages west of the Muhan River are isolated now. We've requested helicopter lifts for medical emergencies, but fuel is rationed," Kouyaté finished. She pinched the bridge of her nose. "Again." Silence spread like spilled ink until the only sound was the wet squeak of a ceiling fan blade. Then Adama tapped the legend at the corner of the map, where he had scrawled a phrase in block letters as if it were a mathematical constant. "Rain is not just water here. It's a wall." He let the words sit, daring anyone to contradict them. The wall metaphor cut deeper than any statistic. Water should nourish, cleanse, baptize. In Burkina Faso's countryside, it barricaded progress, damned hope, turned parents into pallbearers. That truth hovered over the table, grim and undeniable, until one director cleared his throat and ventured, "We could fast-track the asphalt tender, borrow emergency funds, and seal ourselves to another decade of repayments," Kouyaté snapped. "We already owe more for roads that lasted 5 years than for schools that would last 50. She softened, but only slightly. "Unless you have a way to keep asphalt from melting at 45 degrees Celsius and floating away at the first downpour, borrowing is a bandage on a bullet wound." Adama lifted the blue marker again, hesitated, then placed it neatly beside the red. "What if we stopped fighting the rain?" he said, almost to himself. A fragile thought, yet powerful enough to hush the room. What if we built with what the rain can't wash away, because it is already part of the soil? He didn't mention the late-night email chain with an unorthodox young captain named Ibrahim Traoré, or the Japanese dossier labeled Dono Technique. Not yet, but the idea flickered behind his eyes like distant lightning over dry savanna, promising storm or salvation. No one could tell. For the first time all morning, the directors leaned in instead of away. In the quiet, the fluorescent buzz seemed to fade, replaced by an almost audible question pulsing beneath the map's red scars. If the rain is a wall, who will dare to dig a door through it? Outside the ministry, the rain continued to fall, not in torrents this time, but in the slow, steady rhythm of something ancient and unbothered. Inside a modest side office, tucked between the archives and the dusty planning department, a low conversation unfolded over 2 chipped mugs of Nescafé. Adama Kabore sat hunched across from a quiet young man whose presence felt almost out of place amid the chaos of government. Daiki Nakamura, a Japanese volunteer with the JICA infrastructure team, had barely said a word all morning, but now that the meeting had ended and the higher-ups had moved on, he pulled something from his canvas satchel, a small laminated report with faded Japanese script in a single photograph. Villagers in Southeast Asia, barefoot and smiling, standing proudly on what appeared to be a road made of bags? Adama squinted. "You're saying that's a highway?" Daiki shook his head, smiling politely. "Not highway, community road, local method. We call it dono. It means earth bag. Very old, but still useful." Adama gave a half laugh, half groan. "I don't think we have the luxury of useful but old. We need scalable, modern, climate-proof solutions, not sandbags." But Daiki wasn't pushing. He simply flipped to a second page. There, under a diagram of layered materials, soil, fiber, clay, geotextile mesh, were 2 phrases in bold. Construction cost, 40% of conventional methods. Lifespan, up to 2 times longer in monsoon zones. That got Adama's attention. Still, he was a man of the system. "And what would the World Bank say if we turned in a national road plan made of mud and string?" Daiki's voice lowered. "Maybe. World Bank should listen to the ground first." He slid the page forward, then added almost as an afterthought, "There's someone you should speak to. A captain, military, very young. He sees something in this. He called me 3 weeks ago, asked for technical manuals, case studies, even training videos. Said we're not looking in the right direction." Adama leaned back, unsure whether to laugh or take notes. A captain involved in road engineering? It sounded like another romantic military detour. Grand ideas, little patience, less funding. He'd seen them come and go, but Daiki wasn't finished. "His name is Ibrahim Traoré. You haven't heard much about him, yet." That word hung in the air like a prophecy. There was no thunder outside now, only the quiet percussion of water beating against windows and rooftops, filling gutters, carving shallow channels into the soft earth of the capital. Adama stared at the photograph again, at the pride in the villagers' faces, at the simplicity of the method. No trucks, no concrete, just bags of earth and hands willing to work. He said nothing, but Daiki could tell a crack had formed in the wall of skepticism. As the younger man stood to leave, He paused in the doorway, voice barely above a whisper. What if we built with the land instead of against it? The words didn't land with force. They slipped in quietly, lodged in the mind like a seed under dry soil, waiting for the right moment to take root. Adama didn't move for a long time. On the desk before him, the crimson map still lay open, bleeding across the countryside. But just beside it now, a single page of hope lay flat and silent, ready to be read again. Before he was called a revolutionary, a reformer, or a threat to the global order, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was just a quiet cadet who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. His instructors at the École Militaire in Ouagadougou remembered him not as the loudest or strongest in the unit, but as the one who always kept his boots clean, even after field drills. Not because of vanity, but because, as he once put it, if you don't respect the ground you walk on, it won't carry you far. Born in the dry north near Djibo, Traoré came from a line of farmers whose relationship with the land was less romantic and more desperate. He was 5 when the Great Famine of 2005 struck. He remembered the sound of millet grinding to dust between his grandmother's trembling hands, the flies that gathered not because of death, but because the children were too weak to swat them away. He remembered walking 12 kilometers with his uncle to collect food rations, only to return and learn that his cousin, barely 6, had died the night before. Not from war, not from disease, but from hunger. A quiet kind of death, the sort that doesn't make headlines. The silence of that moment left a mark far deeper than any battlefield. When Traoré entered the military academy a decade later, he wasn't the kind of recruit who dreamed of parades or medals. He saw the army as the last institution that still moved, in a country where everything else, education, roads, hospitals, stood still or moved backward. His fellow cadets joked that he read more about post-colonial economics than about weapon systems. They weren't wrong. On weekends, while others played cards, he devoured Frantz Fanon, Thomas Sankara, and Walter Rodney. He underlined passages like scripture, especially one line that seemed to encapsulate his growing conviction. Independence means nothing if we still borrow to stand. That became more than a quote. It became a personal code. During his first deployment in the eastern Topoa region, he wasn't stationed at a conflict post, but assigned to logistics. The task, escort and secure a convoy of imported asphalt mix and foreign contractors en route to repair a 12-kilometer stretch of road. Traoré kept notes. The convoy carried $1.2 million worth of materials, 36 men from a foreign firm, and took 4 weeks to finish work that, according to locals, could have been done with community labor in half the time. Worse, the new road began to crack 3 months later, when the rains returned. When he reported the issue, his commanding officer shrugged. "We've already paid the invoice." It was then that Traoré realized the problem wasn't always sabotage. Sometimes it was the system working exactly as designed. He started asking different questions. Not how do we fight harder, but why are we still renting our own future? In barracks after lights out, he whispered ideas to fellow soldiers. Some laughed, some listened. He talked of building a country that didn't depend on foreign blueprints to design its destiny, of roads that didn't need debt, of dignity reclaimed not with slogans, but with shovels and soil. One night a sergeant asked, half mocking, "And what are you going to build it with?" "Magic?" Traoré didn't flinch. "No," he said. "With earth, with people, with patience." There were no cheers, no applause, just silence, and the flicker of something like belief in the dim glow of a shared cigarette. By 2022, when political unrest shook the capital and the old order began to splinter, Traoré wasn't among the loudest voices calling for change. But when the call came, he didn't hesitate. Those who rose with him were not generals or bureaucrats, but field medics, logistics officers, rural commanders, people who had walked the cracked roads, who had seen the weight of failure not in spreadsheets, but in the eyes of mothers forced to carry their sick children through mud. In the months that followed his rise, the media painted him in extremes, hero or threat, savior or tyrant. But those close to him knew something else. Traoré hadn't come to chase power. He came because he remembered the famine, the dust in his grandmother's bowl, the silence of that empty hut, And he had sworn long ago that no child should ever die simply because a road had disappeared. The presidential meeting room in Ouagadougou's Palais de Peuple wasn't designed for subtlety. The walls were lined with imported mahogany, the table polished to a mirror sheen, and in the center a chandelier from France dangled like a frozen crown. It was the kind of room built not for decisions but for declarations. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, however, wasn't in a declaring mood. He sat at the head of the table, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in his standard field fatigues, boots still streaked with dust from his last village visit. Across from him sat 6 of his senior economic and infrastructure advisors, flanked by representatives from the Ministry of Finance, and at the end of the table, a polished delegate from the International Monetary Fund. Folder open, smile practiced. The offer was simple, the man said. A $300 million loan, low interest, long-term, flexible disbursement. It came with advisory support, foreign technical assistance, and fast-tracked approval for modern infrastructure initiatives. Multi-lane highways, a new transport hub in Bobo Dioulasso, smart traffic systems in the capital. A transformation of the nation's profile, the IMF rep assured, that will position Burkina Faso as a serious player in West African development. One advisor leaned forward eagerly, flipping through the proposal. This would allow us to pave nearly 400 kilometers in just 2 years. We'd be on the map. Another added, our neighbors, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, they've all taken similar routes. It's the way forward, Captain. Traoré didn't answer right away. He stared at the folder, but not at its contents, at its smooth foreign paper, its neat graphs, its impossible polish. He imagined how it would look on a donor's desk in Washington. Another checkbox ticked, another partnership formed, another round of applause. He finally spoke, voice quiet but firm. I've walked those 400 kilometers, he said, most of it, on foot, and I've seen where asphalt goes in this country. It melts at 45 degrees, it cracks in a year, it collapses in the first serious rain. He looked up. We borrow, they build. It breaks. We borrow again, and the applause gets louder each time we go back for more. A murmur of discomfort ran through the room. The IMF rep gave a diplomatic smile. With proper engineering, with foreign contractors, imported machines, imported materials, Traoré cut in. And when it collapses, they say our people didn't maintain it properly, but they never trained them. They never trusted them. He leaned forward. Tell me something. In this deal, how many kilometers are built with local soil by local hands? Silence. Then the finance minister offered cautiously, none. But that's not the model. That's not how modern infrastructure works. Traoré exhaled, slow and deliberate. Then maybe it's time to change the model. He pushed the folder gently away. We don't need concrete palaces. We need roads that live, that breathe with the land, that survive the rain, that our people can fix with their own tools when they break. His gaze swept the room. We've spent decades learning to beg eloquently. And what has it bought us? Pride that crumbles in the monsoon. Roads that only reach the capital. Clinics that no ambulance can access. Villages where mothers still bury their children because the road didn't come in time. One of the younger advisors, visibly torn, asked, and what will we tell the world when they ask why we rejected help? Traoré didn't hesitate. We'll tell them we chose to build with what we have. We'll tell them that dignity doesn't come with signatures, it comes with calloused hands. And if they still don't understand, he stood. The room followed. Then maybe they're not the world we want to impress. No one applauded. The folder remained untouched, its offer still glowing on imported paper. But beneath the silence, something had shifted. Not policy, not yet, but posture, a subtle straightening of backs, a glance exchanged between colleagues who had long accepted the inevitability of debt. For the first time, someone had said no, and meant it. Somewhere deep beneath the Palais de Peuple, the ground itself seemed to take notice. At night, when the capital's buzz softened and the weight of decision-making lifted just enough for a man to breathe, Captain Ibrahim Traoré would retreat to a small corner office in the rear of the presidential compound. It had once belonged to a forgotten Secretary of Trade, now repurposed into a kind of war room, though there were no maps of military offensives here. Only schematics, soil reports, and photocopied engineering papers from across the developing world. The desk lamp cast a narrow cone of yellow light, illuminating titles in French, Japanese, and occasionally English. Stabilized earth structures, resilient rural transport design, case studies from Bangladesh and Laos. Traoré read with the same intensity he had once applied to military strategy. Only now the enemy wasn't armed insurgents, but dependence, fragility, and imported failure. He scribbled notes in the margins, circled diagrams, paused often to stare out the window where the red clay earth met the night sky. In his mind, he replayed images of broken bridges, sunken roads, flooded ambulances, the quiet funerals of children who never reached clinics in time. Then one night, among the documents passed quietly to him by Daiki Nakamura, he paused on a phrase he had seen before, but never read so closely. Dono technique, soil-based road construction using local materials, layered compaction, low cost, climate resilient. The accompanying image was almost absurd in its simplicity. Hand-packed bags of earth laid down like bricks, reinforced with natural fibers, compressed with nothing more than wood planks and human weight. No bulldozers, no cranes, no foreign cement. Traoré stared at it for a long moment. This was not some gleaming marvel of modernity. It was old, primitive even, and yet it worked. Across parts of Asia, it had endured monsoons, tremors, and floods. Villages had built entire transport corridors using little more than what lay beneath their feet. In that moment, the captain felt something shift, not a revelation, but recognition. Something he had always known, but never seen spelled out in ink. Strength doesn't always come from the outside. He stood and walked to the courtyard, barefoot, letting the late-night humidity soak into his skin. He crouched and pressed his palm into the damp red soil. It was warm, alive. His fingers came away stained but firm, as though the land itself had gripped him back. "This," he whispered, "is what we have." In the days that followed, he made no grand announcement, no press conference, just a series of quiet calls, first to JICA, then to engineers willing to train others in the Dono method, then to governors in remote provinces who had long been ignored by central planning. "Start small," he said. 1 kilometer, no machines, just teach them, let them build. His advisors were skeptical. One asked if this was a temporary fix. Traoré's answer was simple. "Temporary is what we've been building for 60 years. I want something that holds." In an internal cabinet memo, he outlined a pilot program, Dono roads in 3 test regions, using 90% local materials, with construction managed by villagers themselves. It was a logistical gamble, politically risky, and unlikely to impress international donors. But it was his. The plan circulated in silence. A few officials rolled their eyes. Others shrugged. One minister was heard muttering, "We'll be the only country trying to move forward by digging backward." But Traoré didn't flinch. He called his staff into the courtyard on a quiet Sunday morning, held up a bag filled with packed laterite, and placed it on the ground. "This is not poverty," he said. "It's potential. We will build roads from this." And with that, a new blueprint was laid, not just for infrastructure, but for sovereignty. Not built on dollars, built on dirt, on hands, on the quiet defiance of a nation choosing to stand tall on the soil that raised it. The sun had barely broken over the low, dry hills of Yatenga when the convoy appeared, or rather, when it didn't. There was no siren, no long row of black SUVs, no flags fluttering from windows. Just a dust-covered Toyota Hilux, its paint faded by years of hard sun and harder roads, tires coated in the red-brown crust of the Sahel. It rattled to a stop just beyond the half-collapsed culvert that once connected the village to the main provincial road. From behind the wheel, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped out alone. No bodyguards, no press, no entourage. Just him, a worn canvas satchel slung over one shoulder, boots caked in dust, eyes scanning the horizon like a man searching for something he'd already lost once. The silence that met him was thick, not reverent, but wary. A few children peered out from behind millet stalks, clutching each other's sleeves. Two elders, seated under a neem tree, exchanged glances but said nothing. A middle-aged man with a weathered face and machete at his belt stepped forward slowly, shoulders squared. "Captain Traoré?" he asked, as though testing whether the name fit the body before him. Traoré nodded. The man squinted, then looked around. "Where are your men?" "No need," Traoré replied simply. "I'm not here for war." A murmur rose behind the compound walls, low, doubtful, edged with cynicism. The name Traoré had reached the village in crackling radio transmissions and market whispers, wrapped in half-truths and rumors. Some said he was the new Sankara. Others called him a soldier playing politician. But no one expected him to show up in person, especially not here. Not in Nyangoloko, a place so often left off maps that even aid convoys used to ask for directions twice. An elderly woman emerged from her hut, squinting at him. "So, you've come to see our broken road?" she asked. Her voice wasn't hostile, just tired. "I've come to help rebuild it," Traoré said. She laughed, sharp, sudden, not unkind. "And what does a soldier know of roads?" Traoré didn't answer. He just knelt, pressed his hand into the cracked soil beneath his feet, and looked up. "Enough to know what happens when they disappear." The villagers weren't convinced, not yet. Skepticism here wasn't impolite, it was survival. They'd been promised roads before. Big machines had come once, a decade ago, then vanished after 3 weeks, leaving behind a ribbon of brittle asphalt that cracked under the first rain and never saw repair. Before that, a foreign NGO arrived with cement and slogans, took photos, then left halfway through construction when funding dried up. So when Traoré gathered the elders under the neem tree and unrolled a simple sketch of Adono Road, drawn by hand, marked with local material types and labor needs, they listened, but with the caution of people who had buried too many dreams already. He explained the method, how the road would be built not with foreign machines, but with their own hands. How the earth they stood on, yes, this very soil, would be pressed, layered, and shaped into a surface that could withstand flood, heat, and time. No concrete, no asphalt, just earth and trust. A younger man spoke up. "You mean we build it ourselves?" "Yes," Traoré replied, "with training, with tools, together." Another villager scoffed. "You want us to believe we can do what foreign engineers couldn't?" Traoré looked at him evenly. "I want you to believe in what they never tried." Still, the silence that followed was not yet approval. It was a pause, the kind that hangs in the air before the first stone is lifted, before the first doubt gives way to action. Traoré didn't push. He stood, thanked them, and walked the length of the old road on foot, his boots crunching over patches of loose gravel, soft sinkholes and weeds growing where pavement should have been. He stopped at a bend where the path vanished into overgrowth. Squatting, he picked up a fistful of laterite and let it run slowly through his fingers like an hourglass, the grains catching the sun in small red sparks. Behind him, the villagers watched, quiet still, but less suspicious now. They didn't move, but neither did they walk away. Something unspoken had begun, not belief, not yet, but a shift. A question maybe, forming in the space between disbelief and wonder. Could this really be different? Could we really build it? Ourselves? And for the first time in years, the dirt beneath their feet didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a beginning. The next morning, before the Harmattan winds could lift the dust into shimmering curtains, Nyangoloko's central clearing filled with a low, purposeful hum. It was the sound of shovels biting soil, of mortar pans clanging together, of voices testing melodies that had slept for years. Traoré had returned at dawn with 2 junior engineers, Daiki Nakamura's instructional binders, and a single mechanical rammer no bigger than a sewing machine. That was all. 3 clipboards, 1 modest tool, and a conviction contagious enough to pull half the village from their beds. First came the earth itself, Men carved shallow pits at the edge of a dried-out pond, shifting layers of laterite into wheelbarrows. The soil was rust-red, heavy with iron, and when water splashed over it, the mixture turned the color of fresh blood. Beside the men, women sieved gravel scavenged from an abandoned quarry 5 kilometers away, breaking the larger stones with hand mallets whose wooden handles were polished by time. Everything was weighed by eye, measured by memory, mixed by instinct. No one complained that there were no digital scales, no laser levels. They compared textures the way their mothers once judged millet dough, by feel, by trust. Under a marquee made of tarpaulins stitched from old grain sacks, Traoré demonstrated the first step, filling woven polypropylene bags, donated by the regional rice cooperative, with alternating layers of damp clay and coarse aggregate. He tamped each bag with a little rammer until it flattened into a dense brick. "Think of a beating heart," he said, pausing to catch every eye around him. "Compaction is rhythm. Too soft and it collapses. Too hard and it cracks. Feel it." He passed the rammer to a teenage girl named Adisa. She was small, thin as a twig, but when she pressed the handle, her whole body vibrated and the bag settled obediently. An elder nodded with quiet approval. Soon a fluid choreography emerged. Children, exempt from school while the training lasted, formed a relay, darting among scrap piles to retrieve broken cement blocks left over from an abandoned latrine project. They hammered the chunks against flat stones, giggling each time a shard snapped free. What was once waste transformed into filler, and the laughter became part of the mortar, binding people to purpose. Grandmothers took their stations at the sewing benches, patching tears in the earth bags with twine, and a curved needle usually reserved for mending fishing nets. As they worked, they picked up an old call-and-response hymn, low, layered, half lullaby, half work chant. The melody drifted over the site like incense, threading through clinks of gravel, thuds of tamping, splash of water. By mid-morning, they laid the first row of packed bags, each aligned like soldiers at parade rest. A young mason spread a thin layer of lateritic soil over the top, watering it lightly so it formed a sticky paste. Another layer of bags followed, staggered like bricks. The process was slow, repetitive, almost meditative. Dust settled on brows, sweat pooled along spines, yet nobody asked for a break. Even those too frail to lift bags found small rolls, counting layers, fetching water, clapping rhythm for the tampers. It was as if every resident, regardless of age or strength, had been handed a single raw note and, together, turned it into a chord. At noon the sun stood high and fierce, but no one dispersed. Traoré called for a pause and raised a fistful of the red mixture. The crowd stilled. "Look at your hands, Hamashur," he said. Palms opened, fingers shone crimson, caked in mud and mica. "This is not just earth," he continued. "It is memory of harvests, of droughts, of children lost on roads that failed them. And now it is hope. Every bag we lay is a promise we make to ourselves." He let the soil trickle away, grains sparkling like embers before they hit the ground. "We are not only building a road, we are building ourselves." A hush swept over the clearing, deep and reverent. Then an older woman, Mama Bintu, known for never wasting words, lifted her voice, finishing the hymn's refrain alone. "May the path never betray our steps." Others joined, layer by layer, until the chant rolled like distant thunder. And as the rhythm swelled, the tampers struck harder, the shovels dug deeper, and the line of earth bags stretched forward another meter, then another, carving the first visible artery of a living road through a village that, until this morning, had almost forgotten what it felt like to move. The clouds came fast, rolling in from the east like a dark tide swallowing the sun. By late afternoon, the air over Nyangoloko had turned thick and coppery, heavy with electricity. Animals moved differently. Birds fell silent. A goat tugged at his tether with nervous urgency. Inside the homes, villagers closed shutters and reinforced thatch rooftops with extra stones, whispering that the storm would be a bad one, worse than last time. No one said it aloud, but they were all thinking the same thing. The Dono road, just completed that morning, would not survive. It couldn't. It looked too simple, too soft, too human. They had seen asphalt crumble under less, seen water swallow bridges with concrete pillars thicker than a man's chest. How could bags of earth stand where machines had failed? By nightfall, the skies broke open. Rain fell like punishment, thick sheets hammering down with such force it drowned out conversation, pounding tin roofs like war drums. Thunder cracked so violently it set off a dog's howl across the village. Families huddled inside, cradling candles, pots to catch leaks, and each other. But even in the shelter of their homes, eyes kept drifting toward the road's direction, as though trying to see through mud walls and distance. By midnight, the worst of the storm was overhead. Water roared through the ditches, flooding low fields, dragging branches and broken fence posts along with it. A few villagers stepped outside with oil lamps, unable to sleep, drawn toward what they assumed would be the evidence of failure by dawn. One by one, they gathered at the edge of the cleared zone where the Dono Road began. No one stepped forward, just watched from a distance. The road now just a darkened line under the assault of heaven's full fury. No one spoke, but the silence said everything. They had tried. They had worked hard. But some things simply didn't belong to people like them. Rain poured through the night. It didn't let up until just before sunrise, when the last cloud slipped away and the wind lost its weight. The sky turned pale with dawn. Roosters crowed late, unsure if the storm had truly passed. By 6, villagers returned to the road, tentative at first, like mourners arriving at a gravesite. Some carried tools, expecting to dig, to start again. Others carried shame, already bracing to explain what had failed. But what they found stopped them in their tracks. The road was still there. The bags had held their line, each compacted layer now hardened into a solid, rain-tempered seam. There was no sagging, no erosion, no collapsing shoulders. The runoff had followed the drainage trenches as designed. Water had passed over it, around it, but not through it. The road had breathed with the storm and survived. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Someone dropped to their knees to touch the packed surface. Another called over a neighbor. Within minutes, 24 villagers had gathered, saying nothing, just standing in a semicircle around a road that refused to die. Then softly, a man in his 60s, quiet all his life, a man who had buried a child lost to a washed-out path, leaned forward, pressed his palm into the earth and whispered, "For the first time, the rain didn't win." And for the first time, neither did defeat. In a private meeting room on the top floor of an air-conditioned office complex in central Ouagadougou, a group of well-dressed men sat around a long glass table, insulated from the heat and dust of the city outside. The walls were lined with sleek acoustic panels, and a filtered espresso machine gurgled softly in the corner. The room didn't look like it belonged in Burkina Faso, and that was precisely the point. The brass nameplate on the door read, "Infrastructure Strategic Partners, Regional Development Division." But inside, the mood was anything but developmental. Representatives from 3 multinational construction firms, 2 European, 1 Chinese, sat in stiff silence while a local consultant in a navy suit clicked through a presentation projected on the wall. A map of Burkina Faso appeared, peppered with red X's over key provinces: Yatenga, Koudougou, Tapoa, Fada. "These are the regions where Dono roads have begun to expand," the consultant said, pointing with a laser. "In just 6 months, the initiative has replaced over 120 kilometers of contracts that were previously under negotiation with our clients." He paused and then added, "And there are rumors of donor nations shifting budgetary interest. The government is painting this as the future of African infrastructure." A European executive scoffed. "It's mud in bags," he muttered. "You can't build a continent on clay." The Chinese representative, calm and deliberate, interlaced his fingers and said, "Perhaps not, but if they believe they can, then they stop signing our contracts." Silence again. The threat wasn't in the Dono method itself, it was in the idea. A road built without imported materials, without heavy machinery, without foreign expertise. If that model succeeded, it wouldn't just undercut profits. It would rewrite the rules. The local consultant changed slides. A spreadsheet now. We estimate a 22% drop in infrastructure procurement contracts by Q4 if Dono expands nationwide. That's before factoring in other countries copying the model. Another executive, older and ruddy-faced, leaned back and folded his arms. And the captain? Does he understand who he's playing with? The consultant smiled thinly. Captain Traoré is idealistic, charismatic, and dangerously consistent. He's also bypassing traditional funding channels, relying on community labor and local pride. That makes him unpredictable. The Chinese representative nodded. Unpredictable leaders need predictable consequences. And that was when the discussion shifted. The polite euphemisms fell away. Strategies became shadows. One suggested commissioning independent studies to question the durability of donor roads, backed by engineering firms with ties to their consortium. Another proposed bribing local officials to fabricate reports of unexpected erosion or early-stage failure along the pilot sites. A third spoke of offering lucrative maintenance contracts to regional chiefs, conditional upon their resistance to dono expansion. Discredit the method, not the man, someone said. Make it look like it failed on its own. The Chinese executive offered a different route. If certain sections were to fail visibly, perhaps during the next rain, public confidence would erode faster than the road itself. We'd only need to disrupt a few drainage channels. Quietly. There was no pushback, just quiet nods and the clicking of pens. The local consultant added, "There's also media. We've already reached out to several journalists in the capital. A piece titled Romanticism Over Roads? The Cost of Political Vanity Projects is in draft." He paused. It paints the dono method as nostalgic, but ultimately impractical. A good idea that failed under real pressure. And what about the villagers? One asked. The ones who built it? They'll grieve the failure, but they won't know who caused it. And once we come back with trucks and machines, they'll welcome stability again. A final slide appeared. Projected market recovery, 8 to 12 months post-dono disruption. The meeting adjourned not with applause, but with soft handshakes and thin smiles. As the executives filed out, the espresso machine hissed again, its steam rising like a private celebration. No press release would mention this meeting. No minutes would be recorded. But as the door clicked shut, a clear decision had been made. The dono method had made too many people hopeful, and that made it dangerous. So now, they would make it disappear. Quietly, strategically, one washed-out bag at a time. 3 days after the first heavy rains of the season, the Dono Road in Surgu, a quiet agricultural town near the Maohan River, collapsed without warning. It didn't wash away like the old asphalt roads used to. It crumbled, neatly, unnaturally. A clean slice cut through the compacted bags like someone had severed a loaf of bread with a serrated blade. The drainage trench, which had been carefully measured and reinforced with layered gravel, was blocked by a tangle of plastic sheeting and compacted debris that shouldn't have been there. When water had nowhere to go, it surged inward, undermining the structure from beneath. The road didn't fail because of weather. It failed because it had been made to. By midday, the village square was thick with speculation. Someone said they saw a man digging near the drainage 2 nights ago. Others whispered about foreign engineers who had come to inspect, but stayed too long near the foundation. A few pointed fingers at Issa, the site foreman, a man once respected for his steady leadership, now pacing nervously by the remains of the road, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. By evening, a camera crew from the capital arrived, conveniently quick. They filmed the damaged road in tight, dramatic angles. One of them interviewed a local elder out of context. "Do you still believe this method works?" the reporter asked. The old man blinked. "I believe in the people," he said, but that part never aired. The footage spread by nightfall. On social media, headlines multiplied. First Dono Road fails in Burkina Faso. Was it ever viable? Too simple to succeed? And just as the noise reached a fever pitch, Captain Traoré arrived. No convoy, no announcement. Just the same dusty Hilux rolling into Surgu before dawn. He didn't go to the administration office. He went straight to the site. He walked the length of the destroyed section alone, kneeling where the structure had given way. He examined the soil, the remains of the bags, the blocked trench. Around him, villagers stood in small knots, watching silently. A few looked away, ashamed. Others folded their arms in silent defiance, as if daring him to say it was their fault. After nearly 30 minutes, Traoré stood and called for Issa. The foreman approached, sweat already on his brow, though the morning air was still cool. He carried himself with practiced dignity, but something in his posture had frayed. When he stood before Traoré, he avoided his eyes. "Did you order changes to the trench design?" Traoré asked, voice even. Issa hesitated. "No, Captain." Traoré didn't blink. "And the materials? Did you inspect each load?" "I did," Issa lied, voice brittle. Someone in the crowd whispered too loudly, "He took money." Another added, "Saw him with strangers last week." Traoré raised a hand and the murmurs died instantly. "Issa," he said, "look at me." The man's eyes lifted, just for a moment. That was enough. "You made a choice," Traoré said. "Maybe it was money, maybe it was fear. But whatever it was, you didn't just betray this road. You betrayed the hands that built it, the women who sang while packing bags, the children who carried stones barefoot in the sun. That was never yours to trade." Issa dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I thought they would stop us anyway." Traoré's voice remained steady. "Maybe they will try, but we won't help them do it." Then turning to the villagers, he spoke louder. "This is not the end of the road. This is the beginning of a better one." Someone in the crowd asked, "What do we do now?" Traoré answered without pause, "We don't rebuild with anger. We rebuild stronger." By noon, the crowd had become a workforce again. Shovels returned to shoulders. Gravel was sifted anew. Even Issa, stripped of title but not exiled, took up a spade in silence. By evening, the broken section had been cleared, the trench redesigned. The new bags were already being packed with greater care than before, and above them all, the sky threatened more rain, but the villagers no longer flinched. Because the road they were rebuilding wasn't just made of earth. It was now fortified with resolve. The sun had barely risen when Captain Ibrahim Traoré's convoy departed for the ribbon-cutting ceremony in Fadanagurma. It was a symbolic visit. Another Dono road had been completed, this one linking two isolated farming communities that had never before seen a vehicle arrive during the rainy season. There were no cameras, no international press, only locals waiting with drums, calabash wine, and plastic chairs arranged under a neem tree. For them, this wasn't just a road. It was proof that someone in the capital remembered their names. Traoré rode in the second vehicle of a three-car convoy, his window half rolled down, elbow resting against the frame, as he reviewed final remarks scribbled in a pocket notebook. His security detail, minimal by design, remained alert but relaxed. The Dono model was built on transparency, community, presence. He had long insisted, if we hide behind bulletproof glass, we've already lost the people. They were still 40 kilometers from Fada, on a winding stretch of laterite road through sparse woodland, when the first shot rang out. It was distant, almost indistinct, but the convoy braked immediately. Then came the second, closer, then a third, unmistakably targeted. The lead vehicle jerked sideways, engine hissing, and went still. Dust kicked up, disorienting. Traoré's driver shouted, reversing hard just as bullets ripped through the rear window. "Ambush! North Ridge!" someone yelled. There was no panic, only train motion. Two guards dismounted, returning fire into the trees. The attackers weren't many, 5, maybe 6, but well-positioned, professional, not random bandits. This was precise political, the kind of attack designed not to kill, but to send a message. Traoré ducked low but refused to cower. "Drive through," he ordered. "Speed. Get us to the village." The vehicle jolted forward, lurching around the disabled lead car, engine whining against the incline. Shots cracked past them, a window shattered, and Traoré felt something punch into his left shoulder. Sharp, hot. He didn't cry out, just clutched the armrest tighter as blood seeped through his sleeve. They burst past the final bend, and the trees gave way to open plain. Ahead, the village emerged like a mirage. Bright fabric, music, raised fists, unaware. But the gunfire had stopped. The convoy roared into the village square, brakes squealing, doors flung open. It took seconds for the crowd to register what had happened. Then, panic, shouting, people rushing forward. One young girl pointed to the blood on Traoré's arm and screamed. Two guards tried to help him down. He pushed them away. "I'm not going to the hospital," he said through clenched teeth. "Not until we finish." "But Captain, you're bleeding." "And they need to see that I showed up." The village chief, stunned, stepped forward. "Sir, we can postpone. You've been hurt." Traoré looked at him, eyes sharp but steady. "If we postpone for every bullet, we will never build anything." Then he pulled a clean scarf from the glove box, pressed it to the wound, and walked, alone, toward the ribbon. Every step left a red dot on the dust. The drums, silent at first, resumed softly, cautiously, like a heartbeat returning after trauma. He reached the line of ribbons stretched across the new road. Children stood nearby, their eyes wide. Traoré smiled at them, just barely, and raised the scissors handed to him. The cut was swift. The cheer that followed wasn't explosive, it was deep, rooted. A roar not just for the road, but for defiance. Later, when the medical team finally insisted, Traoré let them take him, but not before turning to the crowd and saying, "If the road stood through the storm, then so must we." And as he was driven away, villagers began stepping onto the road, walking its length with quiet reverence. Because now the path they had built was not just lined with sweat and clay, it was marked with blood. The sun rose slowly over Ouagadougou's National School of Public Works, casting long amber shadows across the newly repainted courtyard. Where once only engineers in pressed uniforms had walked, now hundreds of students, farmers, midwives, masons, and teenagers in second-hand sneakers filled the open space, seated in tight rows on makeshift benches. In front of them stood a row of earth-packed bags, a wheelbarrow of gravel, and a wooden tamper balanced across two bricks. Nothing extraordinary to the eye. Yet today, this arrangement marked the beginning of something historic. This was not just a school anymore. It had become the first node in a national network of dono training centers, stretching from the capital to the dry expanses of Dori in the north and down to the green valleys of Gawa in the south. The Ministry of Infrastructure, in partnership with local radio stations, regional education boards, and the quiet but persistent support of JICA, had officially launched the Build Burkina initiative, a plan to train 25,000 Burkinabe citizens in the dono method by the end of the year. This wasn't theory, it wasn't policy, it was a new language of infrastructure, spoken not in spreadsheets and cement formulas, but in soil, sweat, and song. The curriculum was simple but robust. It began with the science of soil, how to identify the best laterite, how moisture levels affected compaction, how to layer gravel and organic fibers for maximum strength. Next came the practice: packing, tamping, laying, sealing. Then came project management, how to lead a community team, organize labor rotations, track progress, and prevent sabotage. But perhaps most revolutionary was who was learning. In the town of Kaya, a 17-year-old named Musa, once a school dropout and part-time mechanic, was now overseeing a team of 30 workers rebuilding the access road to his old primary school. In Banfora, a former seamstress named Ama Diallo had become a brigade leader, training widows and single mothers to lay and maintain dono roads in 3 villages, each now connected to a market center for the first time in decades. When interviewed by a local journalist, Ama simply said, "I used to mend dresses. Now I mend roads." Both are about keeping things from falling apart. In many villages, schoolyards doubled as dono workshops, where children learned compaction by rhythm, counting strokes as they tamped miniature earth bags in competition. Elders, long considered too frail to contribute to infrastructure work, were invited to teach natural drainage techniques and soil knowledge passed down from generations. The dono program was not just inclusive, it was transformative. It didn't exclude anyone who was willing to learn, and in return, everyone felt part of something larger than themselves. Traoré, still recovering from the Feta ambush, appeared less frequently in public but often spoke through pre-recorded radio addresses, broadcast weekly. In one, his voice, soft but resolute, said, "We are not building roads, we are rebuilding trust. Each bag you pack says, 'I believe this country can hold its own weight.'" The visuals across the nation began to change. In the ministry's control center, a massive digital map of Burkina Faso showed blinking green dots marking completed dono roads. Every week, the dots multiplied, first around the outskirts of the capital, then outward like veins reconnecting to a long-neglected heart. From north to south, from the dusty Sahel to the fertile plains, paths once considered forgotten were now glowing lines of effort, of connection, of return. In one viral video, filmed from a drone, a dono road curved gently through a savanna, children racing bicycles along its path, goats ambling behind. The caption read, "Built by hands that had never been asked." This wasn't just infrastructure, it was identity restoration. For a country often dismissed as landlocked, impoverished, and unremarkable, these roads were a quiet rebellion against that narrative. They were not grand highways or monuments, but veins of autonomy, carrying more than just people and goods. They carried proof. Proof that the nation had what it needed all along. Proof that progress didn't require debt or deference or dependence. It required belief, organization, and the decision to start walking, even barefoot, on a road built by your own hand. And for the first time in generations, a country wasn't just being developed, it was developing itself. The cameras arrived quietly at first, one or two small teams from European development magazines, a curious freelancer from Nairobi, a South Korean documentary crew working on a series about resilient cities. They came in rented Land Cruisers and dusty vans, expecting to find an interesting case study, maybe a quirky experiment in localized development. What they found instead was a story too large to fit neatly into sound bites. By the time the first Al Jazeera segment aired, everything changed. The footage opened on a sweeping drone shot over the province of Yatenga, where a snaking ribbon of earth-colored road cut through golden savanna. Along its length, women in wide-brimmed hats tamped bags, children hauled buckets of laterite, and elders offered shaded commentary with calm authority. The narrator explained, "In Burkina Faso, a road revolution is taking place. No concrete, no foreign contractors, just dirt and determination." From there, the global press descended. Reporters from BBC, NHK, France 24, and Reuters embedded themselves in villages once completely unknown to the outside world. They interviewed workers, many of whom had never seen a camera before. They watched ceremonies where the final bag was packed and blessed with shea oil and song. They walked barefoot on roads still soft from curing, watched water roll cleanly through hand-dug ditches during controlled flood tests, and stood in stunned silence as communities laid down 1 meter after another without a single bulldozer in sight. One team from The Guardian met Ama Diallo, the seamstress-turned-road forewoman in Banfora. Standing beside her brigade of women, most widowed or long unemployed, Ama said simply, "They used to call us left behind, but now the trucks drive on what we built." A 91-year-old woman in a village near Zorgo was recorded standing proudly at the edge of a newly finished Dono road, leaning on a carved stick. Her voice, raspy but full of fire, cut through translation. "The world has ignored us for 100 years. Now they copy us." That quote alone was enough to lead headlines around the globe. News segments spliced together images of high-level ambassadors walking carefully on the compacted earth. Boots too clean, expressions half awe, half confusion. A U.S. development attaché remarked on camera, "This is unusual." A Swiss engineer admitted, "I didn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes." An EU delegate was overheard muttering, "This might force us to rethink a few assumptions." The footage captured their surprise. No modern machinery, no towering scaffolding, just villagers laughing as they worked, road edges framed with sunflowers planted by school children as storm markers. The soil glowed with mica flecks in the sunlight. One segment showed an elderly man kissing the road after the first car passed through. The narration whispered, "For them, this isn't just about transportation. It's about being seen." The hashtag DonoRoads hashtag exploded across social media, first in French-speaking Africa, then across the development world. Think tanks began publishing articles. TEDx invitations were issued. An opinion piece in Le Monde Diplomatique asked, "When the poor teach us how to build, will we have the humility to listen?" Back in Burkina Faso, People gathered in community centers to watch these broadcasts on communal televisions, crowding around like it was a World Cup final. Children screamed when they saw their village on screen. Mothers cried when they heard their language translated into German or Korean. Elders watched quietly, faces unreadable, but their eyes said everything. Traoré refused interviews. He declined panel invitations. When asked for comment by a major Western outlet, he simply sent back a handwritten note. "We are not a case study. We are a people finding our feet." And yet the world kept watching, not out of pity this time, but out of awe. Not because of suffering, but because of solutions. In every shot, in every frame, the same truth emerged. The roads weren't just connecting places. They were reconnecting a people to their power, their right to shape their own land, to be more than a line item in someone else's budget. And as the footage aired from Nairobi to New York, from Brussels to Bogota, a quiet, unspoken question began to rise among viewers across continents. If they can do this with dirt, what excuse do we have with all our wealth? The heat was already pressing down hard over the open plain of Traoré by the time the dignitaries arrived. Folding chairs had been arranged in perfect rows under white tents, flanked by flags of diplomatic missions from half a dozen countries. The largest dono demonstration event to date was about to begin. Over 1,000 attendees, dozens of foreign observers, journalists with boom mics, and camera crews with stabilizers tracking every movement. It was a spectacle built for headlines. And yet the man at the center of it all, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, hadn't sent a single press release. The field had been prepared for days. Half-finished dono roadbeds waited like open canvases, neatly lined with bundles of empty soil bags, woven mats of geotextile, and stacks of laterite. Children from the local school waved miniature flags, chanting quietly, their voices already lost in the stir of curious diplomats murmuring over clipboards. A temporary stage had been erected at one end of the site. Government officials took their seats. The Minister of Infrastructure approached the podium and began his address, speaking of innovation, of independence, of Africa reimagining itself. Applause followed, respectful, measured, expected. Then they announced Traoré. The crowd quieted. He walked up slowly, alone. No guards, no aides. He wore his usual green fatigues, a faded cap, and dusty boots. A thin white bandage was still visible under the cuff of his left sleeve, the lingering reminder of Fada's ambush weeks earlier. He stepped onto the stage, stood at the center, faced the thousands who had come to hear him. Then, he said nothing. No greeting, no slogan, no speech. A full minute passed. Then, without a word, Traoré stepped off the stage and walked across the platform, away from the microphones. All eyes followed. No one moved. The cameras kept rolling. He walked to a bare patch of soil. There, beside a pile of materials, he picked up a shovel, bent his knees, dug deep into the earth, filled the first bag, tied it shut, pressed it into place. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under his boots and the whisper of his breath in the dry air. Another bag, then another. His hands worked with practiced rhythm. His uniform darkened with sweat. Dirt clung to his skin. And still he said nothing. Then something broke in the crowd. Not confusion, not tension, but realization. A boy, no more than 12, rushed forward and grabbed an empty bag. A woman followed, unwrapping her headscarf to kneel beside the captain and tamp the soil. A local elder, leaning heavily on a carved staff, took off his sandals and stepped forward. Within 5 minutes, 100 people were working beside him. Within 10, it was the entire crowd. Ambassadors folded their dress shirts and knelt awkwardly in the dirt. Journalists dropped cameras to pick up buckets. A German trade attaché rolled up his trousers and began laying gravel beside a barefoot teenager. The energy shifted from formality to fervor. No one was coordinating. There was no instruction, only imitation, and the quiet momentum of shared movement. From a hilltop nearby, a drone operator captured the moment. A head of state not giving orders, but giving example. The footage would go viral that same evening. The caption that spread with it came from a child's voice, barely heard in the background, saying, "A leader doesn't point, he begins." No headline could compete, no speech could rival it. And for those who were there, no explanation was needed. Because on that dirt field in Traoré, something rare had happened. The people didn't follow a man. They followed a gesture. And in doing so, they discovered that leadership wasn't in the title or the uniform or the cameras. It was in the first hand that reached for the shovel. The town hall in Bobo Dioulasso buzzed with heat and tension. Ceiling fans rotated with dull futility as villagers, teachers, farmers, and a sprinkling of government officials squeezed onto wooden benches for a long-anticipated public forum on infrastructure. The room was packed, not just with bodies but with contradiction. At the front, beneath a faded national flag, stood Minister of Economic Planning Youssouf Kabore, young, sharp-suited, and freshly returned from a summit in Geneva. His voice cut clean through the murmurs as he laid out the question. Burkina Faso is growing. We have new trade demands, urban expansion, regional corridors to connect. Should we not embrace the resources offered by global institutions? With international loans, we could build dual carriageways, flyovers, even export our model faster than Dono can scale. A few in the crowd nodded. Others frowned. But the room remained quiet until a woman in a mustard-wrapped skirt stood up slowly, cradling a framed photograph wrapped in cloth. I buried my son, she said, loud enough that even the fans seemed to pause. He died 3 years ago. We called an ambulance. The road from our village to the city hospital had vanished in the rain, the foreign-built one, slick and proud and cracked within 1 season. She stepped closer to the microphone, face calm but voice tremoring. Speed lost my son, so forgive me, Minister, if I no longer trust speed. The room shifted. A few clapped, softly at first, then louder. A farmer raised his hand and said, I don't need a highway to Paris. I need my cassava to reach market before it rots. Another teacher added, it's not that we reject help, but we reject help that forgets us the moment the ribbon is cut. Minister Kabore listened, his jaw set, his tablet still glowing on the podium. He responded carefully, we do not dismiss Dono, but we must think globally, strategically. No nation thrives on symbolism alone. A murmur of discontent ran through the back rows. Then from somewhere near the center, a student's voice rose. Symbolism didn't hold the road in Sorgu. People did. The debate continued, unresolved but vital. Not a clash of enemies, but of visions. One born from efficiency, the other from memory. And somewhere in the tension between them, a country wrestled with the shape of its own future. The rains came early that year, and harder than anyone could remember. By the end of the second week, meteorologists were calling it a 100-year flood. Rivers swelled beyond their banks, swallowing bridges and carving new gullies through farmland. Entire villages were isolated overnight, and even the Dono roads, which had once held so proudly, began to show signs of strain. In Compiègne, a 6-kilometer stretch washed out in 2 days. In Larume, erosion ate away at the road's edge until the compacted bags sagged like torn fabric. Emergency crews worked tirelessly, piling gravel and rerouting foot traffic. But rumors spread faster than repairs. International headlines were swift and unforgiving. The end of the clay dream? The Economist, rain drowns Burkina's dirt road revolution. Le Monde Afrique. Symbolic roads can't stop climate change. Reuters' social media buzzed with hashtags once full of pride, now tinged with sarcasm. Hashtag Donodown, hashtag MudNotMiracles. Analysts in air-conditioned studios debated the folly of romantic infrastructure. Development think tanks re-released proposals, heavily backed by Western contractors, calling for a course correction. Through it all, one question echoed louder than the rainfall. Where was Traoré? For 10 days, the captain said nothing. He vanished from the airwaves, canceled appearances, refused interviews. His radio addresses ceased. His staff offered only a single line. The president is with the people, but no one saw him. And so, as the skies poured and the roads cracked and doubt swelled across the nation like floodwater, the silence grew deafening. Had the man who defied the IMF finally been broken by the rain? At dawn in the village of Borzanga, where the Dono road had buckled under the pressure of the worst flood in a century, a figure appeared on the muddy edge of the collapse. Not in uniform, not with guards, not with cameras. Just Traoré, soaked to the knees, holding a shovel. Word spread before the sun had fully risen. Villagers emerged from their homes, stunned, watching as he knelt by the broken trench, pulling out debris with his bare hands. No speech, no press statement, just quiet labor, shoulder to shoulder with the same men and women who had once packed those roads under brighter skies. By mid-morning, nearly 100 people had joined. Children hauled gravel, elders refilled bags. One teenage girl wiped sweat from her brow and asked him, "Is it over?" Traoré looked at the damage, then at her, and said simply, "This isn't a failure. It's our next lesson." He didn't promise perfection. He didn't blame the storm. He dug deeper. And that day, in silence and sweat, a new truth was born beneath the mud. It wasn't about roads that never broke. It was about people who refused to stop rebuilding. In village after village, the sound of footsteps replaced silence. Where once flooded paths had cut communities off from life, children now marched confidently to school, laughter trailing behind them. Mothers pushed bicycles laden with yams and cassava. Trucks rolled in, bringing textbooks, medicine, even solar lamps. Markets that used to open once a month now bustled daily, stalls overflowing with produce. A woman in Tatao said to a journalist, "Before, this was the edge of the world. Now it's the center." The Dono roads, once doubted and mocked, had become more than infrastructure. They were lifelines of routine, dignity, and hope. Aerial shots captured them, threading through the countryside like veins, not cutting into the land, but becoming part of it. One child in Gorsi, when asked what had changed, simply said, "Now my feet don't sink, I run." Burkina Faso's parliament passed a landmark bill. Dono as national road policy, no longer a pilot, now official sovereign strategy. Delegations from Ghana, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and even Haiti arrived to study the model. Workshops were held in 3 languages. Regional banks pledged seed capital. The African Climate Resilience Fund allocated $50 million in grants. Even the Burkinabe diaspora in Paris contributed through community bonds, eager to invest in something tangible, something theirs. A single training center in Ouagadougou became 20 regional hubs. Women's brigades outnumbered military units in rural deployment. Even urban planners began adapting the Dono method to peri-urban streets. "This isn't just about building roads," said one delegate from Senegal. "It's about building belief." And in every press briefing, one quote from Traoré was repeated. "We stopped asking what others could give. We asked what we already had." In a quiet room, lit only by a lantern and the slow hum of night insects, Traoré wrote by hand in a worn leather-bound journal. "They told us the world is built with steel and money, but we learned. Earth remembers, and it holds us." He wrote not for history books, but for the next leader who might doubt that clay and conviction could stand against concrete and capital. Outside, the wind kicked red dust along a finished Dono road. A small boy, no older than 6, ran barefoot along its edge, chasing a rolling tire. His laughter rose into the dusk as dust curled skyward behind him, glowing in the amber light. The camera held on that moment. The boy, the dust, the road. No speeches, no flags, just movement, just legacy. This story isn't just about roads. It's about reclaiming dignity with bare hands and local soil. In a world where progress is often defined by steel and foreign aid, Burkina Faso reminds us that true strength lies in self-belief, community, and the courage to begin small. Traoré didn't build monuments, he helped build trust. And in doing so, he showed that resilience is not about avoiding storms, but about rising after them, again and again, with purpose. Because sometimes the quietest revolutions begin beneath our feet. Question to the audience. Have you ever seen something simple, like a road, a gesture, or a small act, spark a powerful change in your life or community? We'd love to hear your story. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.